All right, we should be live. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Bitcoin Knots versus Core discussion on the Tone Base YouTube channel. We should also be streaming to X. So I'm gonna be checking up on that. I'm getting I'm getting audio in the background as well because I just have too many tabs. One second, guys. There it is. All right, let me mute that one. So, okay, we're all set. This is going to be a miner focus show today. In our very first show, we brought you one of the lead people from the core side, Adam Back, who doesn't directly program, but is the CEO of Blockstream, which pays a lot of the core devs, sponsors a lot of the core devs. In our second show, we brought you Luke Dashjr and Mechanic, who were kind of the leaders in explaining why this increase in op return size was so detrimental to the space. And now we wanted to bring you a miner's perspective. So we do have Bob Burnett with us of Barefoot Mining. Now, Bob is running a private Bitcoin mining operation versus the publicly traded miners. And at a non-confiscatable a few years back, there was an awesome debate on a panel about public miners versus private miners, how different they are. Like, are they good for the space? It's a trade-off of more big security with more mining versus, well, what kind of mining are they is each side doing, and are there additional risks with that? I wasn't able to bring a publicly traded miner on this show. I have a statement from a C-level manager of a publicly traded miner, but it's harder for them to do shows like this because of, they're a publicly traded company, so they have to be a lot more careful in what they say, especially on controversial topics. So without any further ado, Bob, go ahead and do an intro of yourself. I'm going to grab your Twitter and do a little screen share on that. Meanwhile, I'll check X, and then Jimmy, weigh in as well on your views right after Bob does his intro on how miners are, involved in this whole dynamic of Knots versus Core. Go for it, Bob.
Well, thanks, Tone, and good to see you, Jimmy. I think maybe to start, it's interesting you brought up the difference between public and private, because I think that is a very important point. And I think it's very material to even the situation that we're in. I think before you even get into like core versus knots, it's good to look at, where are we in the mining ecosystem. So a lot of what's happened in the debate, if you look at core's position, at the core of their position is often statements about being concerned about mining centralization and trying to fight against it. And I find it a little bit off, frankly. And I've had discussions with several of them, and they know that I feel this way. And I think we have to look at where we sit as an industry right now. The mining ecosystem. We have 6 pools that control well over 80% of all of the templates. We have the public miners, which feed a lot of the hash rate to those pools. And those pools are all from a certain mindset that I think is driven in large part from their biggest customers, which are the miners. I mean, to a certain degree, I think it's unfortunate that none of the public miners can come on to talk about their views. If we backed up 5 years and we looked at where mining was 5 years ago, what we would see is that the top pools were all Chinese-based pools. The biggest one 5 years ago was Poolin, and I'm not sure they even exist, or maybe they have a very tiny amount of hash rate today. And the biggest miners in the world were like Bitmain and MicroBT and Bitfury and organizations like this. So where I'm going with this is that in 5 years, what we've had is a major shift in who are the biggest miners, and also a major shift in who the biggest pools are. And I think a lot of the debate has come about where the core position is, hey, we have to fight mining centralization, and things like filters don't work. Well, if we only have really 5 or 6 companies whose template decisions dictate what is going to go into a block, it's true that filters will either work phenomenally well or probably not well at all based on the behavior of just that small subset of companies. The issues around mining centralization, and I didn't watch Adam's discourse with on your show yet, Tom, but I've talked to Adam on this a few times, and there's a lot of things, like, for instance, about making sure a compact block still works effectively. But the truth of the matter is that's a irrelevant. It has an irrelevant impact on whether mining is centralized or not right now. It's kind of a very marginal fringe issue. The bigger issues have more to do with the behavior of the public mining companies and the big pools. 5 years from today, though, this could all change very dramatically. And probably the thing that upsets me the most is that I view core as using the current set of conditions, for instance, that filters don't work in the current environment, as evidence that they will never work, and therefore what's happening with op return, and although they've undeprecated the movement toward deprecation of op return altogether, I think was a very poor choice of assuming that the current conditions are going to be the future conditions. So maybe I'll stop right there and let you guys comment.
Well, so thank you, Bob, for the overview, and I believe you mine with Ocean, so you represent the particular perspective.
That's true.
And I want to start off with just sort of like a basic question, like what's we've learned a lot about like how public miners work and how they use like Marapool, for example, uses Slipstream, and several others have something similar to that. What in your opinion is the biggest difference economically for I guess a private miner versus a public miner? Because obviously they have different pressures, but the economic behavior just seems so different because a lot of these public miners aren't mining on something like Ocean, which has I think better payouts and stuff like that. Like I'm still struggling to understand why they do that and what the pressures are.
Yeah, and I will say too, I'll do my best to strawman that. And those who don't know, I used to be.
I think you mean steelman, not strawman, but yeah.
Oh, what did I say? Strawman.
Strawman.
Oh, okay. I meant steelman. Sorry. Yes, thank you for correcting me. In my previous life, I came from the personal computer industry, and I was the chief technical officer at Gateway, the personal computer company, and we were a Fortune 200 company, so I at least had the experience of being a C-suite executive in a very large public company. So I do understand some of the pressures that come from being a public company. I think, by the way, often they are diametrically opposed to what's best for Bitcoin. That was kind of the basis of the debate that Tone put together at Unconfiscatable a few years ago. I will say this. So let me, to get back to your question, Jimmy. First is, I think it's important to distinguish a few terms or define a few terms. The reality is what we call the public mining companies, with the exception of Mara, none of them are mining companies. They're hashing companies. They don't actually mine. So they sell hash rate to a pool, or you could say lease hash rate to a pool, and abdicate kind of the mining function to those organizations, right? So the construction of the template, who gets the Coinbase transaction, how would signaling for activation of something like a taproot occur? Those are all abdicated by the public miners, to the pools. So that puts them in kind of a completely different position where they're just looking to hash, not really to mine. I had this realization. I've been mining. My mining company, Barefoot Mining, has been in existence since 2017. But I had a realization maybe 3-4 years ago that I really wasn't a miner. The thing I just said, I realized, hey, I'm really not a miner. I'm, at the time I was using Foundry and Brains, and I still have good relationships with both of those companies. But I realized hey, I'm really not a miner, and I want to be a miner. And so my participation with Ocean started from that perspective. So I was actually the first company to commit hash rate to Ocean when I found out that, hey, I was going to actually be able to be a miner again, and so especially as a smaller company, we don't have enough hash rate to effectively solo mine. Now, Mara, that's one thing I don't really understand, frankly, about the big public companies too, is, why use a pool at all? Because if you're sitting on several exahashes at this point, the math says you're going to get a pretty steady income stream regardless. You're going to get 100% of the Coinbase. So that's a bit of a mystery to me in and of itself, why they even deal with pools. But with Ocean, one of the things I do is, even though I'm a private company, I have investors. And so I do have some similarity to a private company in that I have a responsibility to other investors. And so what I did, as soon as we started hashing with Ocean, I set up a control group. So I took 10 identical units or 40 identical units actually in one container. So everything was identical, same firmware, same internet connection, same latency, same everything, right? And I put them in the same container. I divided them amongst 4 pools, 10 units dedicated to each pool. And so I just started a study. It's been going on for almost 2 years now, to measure what is the actual economic difference measured in the payout. It's not theoretical. It's not trying to calculate luck. It's not trying to do these other things, but saying, hey, if I do this for a long enough period of time, those things will play out. And what I found was that I made more money with Ocean. Some windows of time, especially early on, it was significant. Now it tends to be 1% or 3% or something, on that order that comes in. But and there's a whole different rabbit hole probably about I think the way FPPS works and how that's calculated. And one thing I would also say, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, but one thing I don't understand about the appeal of a lot of the other pools is the lack of transparency, because there's so much trust required by anybody directing hash rate to these other pools, because you have to trust that, for instance, things like share calculations are being done in a fair manner, versus with Ocean, where all the shares of all the miners and all the hash rate of all the miners and all the payout to all the miners is all transparent. So you can go in and audit that if you wish. So I'm off the beaten path.
Yeah, I really want to bring this discussion to the knots versus core, not like the concept of mining.
I asked that because I think one of the sort of premises on this op return thing is that miners mine whatever will get them economic, whatever is economic for them on a short-term basis. And I'm wondering why some of them do and some of them don't. So
Yeah.
we've noticed, for example, Mara Pool and F2 Pool have mined a lot of greater than 80 byte op returns, and they do it either through Slipstream, through Libre Relay, or whatever. But there are others that just refuse. Now, is that like a technical thing, or is it like some other restriction, maybe hidden in some contract somewhere else, or like what is?
Did we lose Jimmy?
I lost Jimmy.
What is the reason? Did you?
Yeah.
Where?
Well, we lost you for a second there, Jimmy, but I think I got the gist of the question. So I think but there's two things there. The first one is, as a miner, I don't measure the economics on a block-to-block basis, right? I measure my economics over much more extended periods of time. So I think it's a misnomer to think that miners always want to maximize the block reward in every single block. And there are a lot of factors. For instance, basically nobody does, by the way. This is like for instance, the pools typically mine their own transactions as a priority over anything else in the block. So they're actually not maximizing the fees, right? They're prioritizing something else that has lower fees against certain things. So, and that, by the way, is a filter, right? I mean, if you want to look at it, that's part of their algorithm and it's part of their filter. I do think that part of the question you asked about is why hasn't Ocean had more traction with some of the bigger miners? And part of it is regulatory. Like, there are some asinine requirements. They're not necessarily coming from the public company itself, but things like SOC 2 compliance, which kind of make no sense in our industry, but they're still required. So that Ocean hasn't had SOC 2 compliance, or didn't for most of its history. So that was, something like that was an inhibitor. In a big public company, the legal department has a lot of say, right? I mean, they're really concerned about shareholder lawsuits. I'm not privy to anything, Jimmy, but I would say it's highly likely that if I'm a public miner and I'm directing hash rate, for instance, to Foundry or F2 Pool, that I have some clauses in there about inclusion of certain types of transactions or content that probably needs to be moderated, because they, like I said, the shareholder lawsuits or the SEC or the FBI or whatever, those are terrors. And one of the interesting things that happens in a company is that my experience is a technology company starts out, it's kind of led by the visionaries and the technologists. And as it starts gaining success, those people get less influential, and the lawyers and the finance people become the power brokers within the boardroom. So I'm sure there's some of that going on.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So the argument that we've heard from a lot of the people on the core side is that, hey, like, miners will mine anything as long as it's got enough fees. But what you're suggesting is that oftentimes they're bound by certain contracts, especially if they are getting large amounts of hash rate. Maybe they get like a slight discount on the pool fees or something like that as part of that negotiation. But
they get just to be clear, they get a major discount on the pool fees.
Okay. Okay.
like huge discount on the pool fees.
Okay, they get a huge discount on the pool fees in return, in return for all that hash rate. But they also, because they're not directly involved in choosing the transactions for the block, they have maybe certain clauses in there, possibly, inserted by their lawyers. Hey, if you do this, then this contract is null and void. Which
it's null and void. But
Yeah.
I think they also, now I'm speculating. I think
Mhm.
going back to that whole thing about why is there not more solo mining from the large pubcos? Well, plausible deniability, I think, is a potential answer. That like, hey, they're not responsible for OFAC, they're not responsible for CSAM, they're not responsible for whatever, because it was somebody else.
That's a clever strategy to get ahead of the OFAC stuff. Although I guess that's kind of asking for regulation on that regard now.
Yeah, but again, I'm only speculating, but I can see how that decision could get made, because I mean, you guys know that, like, they're often paying a very low fee, and maybe they're paying, like, the normal person is maybe paying like 2%. They might be paying 0.1%, 0.25%, something on that order. And they may just look at it as, hey, I get the cost of administrating this myself is such that I can absorb the 0.1% or 0.25%, and plus I get this plausible deniability.
Well, that's a little bit disturbing to me, because that means that that plausible deniability aspect means that they won't want to put together their own block templates, and that they'll never want to create use Strata v2 or data or something like that, which lets them do that, which, like, I think a lot of solo miners want to do, like at-home miners want to do, but for a pubco that ends up being a liability, is what I'm hearing.
It does, and it kind of disturbs me too, because I mean, what essentially saying is that a lot of them really don't want to be miners, right? I'll go back to that hasher versus miner. That riding that line is, I think, a very conscious decision for some of them. Now, personally, I want to be on the template side. I realize there is some risk associated with it, right? But I'm managing, and I create my own templates. We have we filter out, I think, a large percentage of the stuff that most people on the knots side or the filter side would like. I think when my blocks get published, I think I rarely get criticism of them from anybody. But what I'm doing is, like, I believe that a miner, it is the job of a miner to produce block space. So I look at that as my product. So I think that the pubcos look at their product as producing Bitcoin, and I look at it as I produce block space. And so and I believe that over time, and some people may not like this, I believe that there will be a massive fight for block space, so that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity that will come from being in the position of producing block space. Like, for instance, I think I may have talked to you about it, Tone, at some point, but I'm working on a project right now to create block space forwards. So basically meaning that people could sit here in October and, let's say, buy access to a block in the end of December, at a certain price. Say, okay, well, I'm gonna say, I know I have enough hash rate to, let's say, mine a block a week. So on average, right? So I can sell 100,000 weight units at 15 sats for VByte in December now, and I can guarantee a price now, and the buyer, the consumer, could know that they have a locked-in space at a certain price.
All right, guys, I have to get us back on the actual topic.
Sorry, Don.
We're gonna have to dive and stick to the topic on core versus knots.
Yeah.
And okay, so Bob, what is your position? And you have been a pretty vocal advocate that you are not happy with the current change that Core has made, which is not a change to consensus. It is simply a change to policy. So feel free to, like, I'm opening up the floor to you to kind of summarize why you see this as dangerous, bad, evil, like anything you want to say. Take a few minutes, and then I will read the statement that I have from a publicly traded miner, and then we're going to debate, is this really as bad as it's gotten a lot of people all riled up? And is this a good thing? Is it a necessary thing? Well, like, we want to like present people on all sides, because I think there's a lot of people that are acting irrationally, or maybe they're not over the situation, or perhaps this is really a big deal. So what is your overall issue with the latest change?
It'll start with, I think it is an attempt to fix a problem that doesn't exist right now. So I think it's a classic problem that engineers have, and I've dealt with them for 40 years, which is sometimes tinkering with things that aren't broken. And I think that the limit, the upper limit at 83 is just fine. I think that the justification for it to help decentralize mining is unnecessary. And I believe it opens up a whole additional can of worms that have potentially a very negative effect. So I also think that this has identified, I think, a weakness in the process by which Core operates. So if you look at engineering, like, I would say there's this process that Core operates under, the dev mailing list and the GitHub, where it's a very, very technical group of people that participate there. It's very difficult to break into that group. I found it in my own attempts to try to engage there. I found myself at least feeling very unwelcome. And I think that forum is fine for things like security issues, bug fixes, performance optimization, those kinds of things. But I think when it starts relating to policy, when it starts changing feature sets, that's a problem. I also think that one thing that has been missed by a lot of the community has been, there's a lot of the attention has been about what these changes mean for nodes. And maybe this is why you've done this, but it also has implications for miners. So if you're a miner and you wish to create your own templates, what you want is you want a piece of software that gives you a whole bunch of configurability and optionality to choose and create the templates that you wish to go. And what we're doing is we're on a path to reducing that functionality. And I think it's a path toward homogeneous template creation, which I think is a really bad thing. Now that's controversial because I think Core is kind of the mindset of, hey, we want to basically be able to predict what all the next templates are. And I'm of the mindset of, no, we don't want to be able to predict what all the next templates are. We want the market to decide and the people with a hash rate to decide, and we're going down the wrong path.
Well, I'm gonna counter this. Like, to me, it sounds like a little bit of the opposite, right? Like, to me, it sounds like by eliminating the op return, miners are going to be a lot more incentivized to really know what's in their blocks, hence pushing for their own templates. To me, this actually, again, I could be wrong, but to me, it sounds like this will make miners a little more accountable to what exactly they're mining, will make them pay attention a little more to what they are mining. And they may take the criticism if they end up mining a transaction that is now more visible of what's in the transaction, which is what Core's, one of the reasons why the Core team has increased the SOP return limit is to make the playing field a little bit more even across all miners and create more transparency as to what is in the block. Hence, to me, it sounds like this puts more effort onto the miner to know what they're mining and show what they're mining and make those templates. Why do you see it the opposite?
Well, what I'm saying is the product itself is making it more difficult to configure your template. So, and by the way, that's a huge advantage of knots. It's one of the reasons we use knots in, we run, I think we probably run 15 or 16 different datum implementations at our different sites. We run.
I'm going to have a follow-up question on that, but go ahead.
Okay. And we are able to go in at a very granular level. You know, for instance, we can prioritize through knots things like coinage. So in other words, and this used to be possible in Core, but it's kind of fallen by the wayside. We can go in, and when we prioritize a template, we can say, hey, if this UTXO is 14 years old, we're essentially paying homage or to the person that has held it for that period of time, and we also know that it's most likely a purely monetary transaction, and so we can give that transaction priority in our template. And I think those are the sort of things. I think in the future, I think what we want is we want miners, the people making the templates, to have as much configurability as possible. Somebody may be philanthropic and say, hey, I want to pick the transactions in the mempool that have been hanging around the longest. Whatever, it doesn't really matter, right? The point being that I don't think it's healthy, because I think it leads to censorship if all the block templates start getting very, very homogeneous. Then I think that is a bad thing. I think we want to have a certain amount of variability within it. The core position, and I'm trying to steelman it, is like, hey, we want to help the small miner, because if there's a lot of variability and in the mempools of the different miners, and they have to rebuild blocks instead of doing the quicker validation through compact block, then they're at a disadvantage. And there's truth to there's an element of truth to that. I'm not disputing that, but I just think it's a minor marginal issue. And most small miners, like I'm a small miner, but I don't have bandwidth issues. I can buy high performance internet and I can get by. It may help, a guy using one of these trying to do things might be at a disadvantage, but so in other words, Tone, it's not so much it's about the tool allowing the templates to be different and maximizing that, versus I do hope that a whole bunch of people create their own templates, and I think Datum and SV2 are good paths for that. I'm not sure the public guys are going to go that way anyways because of the previous discussion, but.
All right, so let me, let me read that. No, I'm going to do a follow-up on the knots nodes. So you mentioned that you are running a knots node, and there's a lot of confusion, I think, from what I see on Twitter comments, that people don't really, I don't think people properly understand what running a knots node is. And I did bring it up in my discussion with Luke and Mechanic, and they didn't see it that way, the way I see it. But because this is not a consensus change, this is a policy change. running a NOTS node is, I don't want to, I might be using an inflammatory word. It's almost like a virtue signal, because you are not stopping any of these greater than 80 byte comments in the op return. You're just not propagating those blocks. But
no, you're not propagating the transactions.
The transactions.
You propagate the blocks.
No, I meant the transactions. You're not pushing the transactions into the mempool, but the transactions are in the mempool, right? Because even a tiny percentage that runs version 30 will, push these transactions into the mempool, and any miner can now pick them up. So unless there is a push for a consensus change via soft fork or hard fork, what does running a NOTS node actually do other than announcing to the world, I don't like more than 80 bytes of data in the op return? Like, other than waving a flag saying, I'm not happy about this. And a lot of people put these flags on their Twitter profiles without really knowing the underlying situation, because they've been, they've read something, or their famous or their favorite influencer in any space, right? This could be any of the geopolitical conflict, any social conflict, like vaccines, no vaccines, lockdowns, no lockdowns, or in the Bitcoin space, are we allowed? Do we want data more than 80 bytes or not? But running a NOTS node doesn't actually change what is and isn't being mined right now. What is the main use of running a NOTS node other than announcing, I don't like this?
So a couple things. First, right now is correct, but it goes back to, hey, if the top 6 pools, which control over 80% of the blocks, choose no filters and choose to mine this stuff, you're absolutely right that the filter will have very little effect. I'll also say the opposite would be true. If they all turned the filter on, it wouldn't stop them, because I think somebody would ultimately mine them, but it would make the cost of getting them through much, much higher. As pertains to the virtue signaling, just to be clear, I've been running NOTS nodes for over a year, well before this controversy started. And the reason I do is I'm running a business. And I mentioned, when I started creating datum blocks, I started running NOTS. And I started running it because, as a miner, it gives me much greater configurability, and it's easier, significantly easier than a core node. So as a miner, I think NOTS is a superior solution if you want to be a template creator. Now, at the node level, there's not much difference, between there probably is virtual signaling going on for a lot of people, and I guess that's up to them to decide. If I don't know. I'm not real big on the virtual signaling. I think it helps. It is sending a message that there's a dissatisfaction that core isn't listening properly. So I started talking before about the process, and I think one of the things core has to work on, and I had a really long conversation with Michael Schmidt from Brink on this earlier this summer. We spent about 3 hours on a conversation about the process, and basically I think what has to happen is there has to be a significant change to the way the process works if it affects the feature set or the policy. And I think that's at the root of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. So I just want to point out, for a node runner, first of all, a lot of people mine just like Bob, right? It's not nearly at the scale as Bob does, but there are people with bit access at home, and if you are mining and want to create your own templates, it's very hard to do. Well, I mean, you can do it with Core, but it's a little easier with not. So, and that's not a small portion of people. A lot of people have bit axes now, and that's
Probably 100,000 plus people, I believe.
Yeah, that's not a small number, and those are perfectly legitimate ways, reasons for people to run knots. The other thing is, I sent you a link, Tone. This is a test that was run by Floppy, and he essentially connected to different types of nodes, right? And he wanted to know, okay, is there any difference if you're connecting to a Libre relay node, 29.1 node, 30 node, or anything else? And there's some interesting stats in there, particularly around what happened with the various peers that he had. So scroll down, and there's a particular image that I want you to see. You can turn that off. Keep going down. Keep going down. Keep going down past that, and it's like the first sort of table. Keep going. It's that table right there. Okay. So check out that table. What you can see are this is he just left this thing on, and basically he wanted to see how much data he was downloading from various places, and you could see that the amount of bandwidth that was used up by the Satoshi 29.1 and Satoshi 30 was significantly higher than the knots nodes, the 3 knots nodes at the bottom, the one that's and even like Satoshi 29.0, 28.2, and this is largely due to the 0 point subsat per vbyte transactions that were sort of flooding the network. And the thing is, he was still getting them into his mempool for compact block relay because he's connected to these 2 other nodes. But additional bandwidth in that regard is actually kind of useless, right? Even this is a little bit redundant. He probably only needed to connect to one of these. But it is actually better for your node because this is the download bandwidth. And in addition, if you're running Core 30 or Core 29.1, you're uploading these to all of your peers. So in addition to all of this data that you're downloading, you're having to upload the same data to all of these other nodes, in which case you are using a significant amount of upload bandwidth as well if you're running something like that. So like,
is this the one, Jimmy? Is this the one where he calculated? I saw a tweet. I didn't read the article where he calculated it's like an extra $12 a year or something like that.
I'm not sure what the costs end up being, but it is bandwidth that your node is using, and especially if you're using, like, most of us run our nodes not on the cloud but at home, right. Especially if we're mining with like a BitAxe or something like that. It does make a difference. Now I get that they're definitely people that are running it purely as a virtue signal, but there are practical considerations like this where there are download and upload bandwidth considerations, and maybe it doesn't matter to you because you have like gigabit Ethernet or gigabit internet with Google Fiber or something. But if you don't, and this is stuff like this matters, or you're in an area where bandwidth is a little more scarce or something like that, these things start mattering.
Thanks for this, Jimmy. I got a quick follow-up for you. Now, this is over how much time?
I think it's about 5 days. Oh, wait, my node was running for 10 hours. This is over 10 hours.
And I just want to add one clarification because there is some confusion even in our live chat. This is bandwidth of moving the transactions through. Running a NOTS node, or let's say into the future, it doesn't actually change how much, like the size of the Bitcoin blockchain you're storing, because a block, let's say a block is going to be full, assuming there's enough transactions. We're still dealing with non-full blocks, but let's assume Bitcoin blockchain is popular enough that every block is full. It doesn't matter if it's 4,000 Taproot transactions with no op return, or it's 10 maximized op return transactions. A block is going to be 1 megabyte of data stored in your laptop. So you're not actually
not quite, Tone, not quite,
but it's close.
I mean, it can vary by
So it's that it's 1 virtual byte or 1 megabyte of virtual
4
megabyte
million
or
weight
whatever.
Units.
Yeah.
4 million
weight, which could be as much as 4 megabytes on disk, or down to 1 megabyte on disk. Yeah.
Right. So actually, it's actually the other way, right? So if it's full of Taproot transactions, that's going to take up more data in your node, on your laptop, than if it's op return transactions, right? So those that are choosing not because they think they're going to be storing more data, it's actually the other way around. If every transaction maxes out the op return, you're actually going to be storing less data in your node, then at least it'll fill up slower. Eventually, it will all be the same because important transactions will get through.
Yeah. As far as your disk is concerned, but this is much more with regard to bandwidth usage, and this is material, right? Like this is over 10 hours, 200 megabytes, and if these were all like Core v30, then it would be significantly more instead of just like 2 nodes. And again, you're having to use your upload bandwidth, which is in general with retail ISPs and so on, like much more valuable. So if you're running Core v30, you're uploading a hell of a lot more. And I mean, maybe you don't need the upload bandwidth, and you can just sort of use it very loosely. But if you want to save that, then it might make more sense to just run NOTs from that perspective, because you're using less of the resources of the internet connection you have.
Okay, gotcha. All right, that was a good distinction. All right, so let's transition to the other topic, and this is where I will. Okay, let me stop screen share and go back to us. This is where I'll get to read the statement. So the statement that I have from a public miner, who I'm not going to name the person nor the company, and the statement was they believe Luke Dashjr is wrong. His arguments are legal and not technical, and in terms of that, there is no one is going to be arrested or charged for content automatically stored on their server by a protocol, and there is legal precedent for this. And the second reason is, if the government wanted to arrest you for something on your PC, they would put it in there and then arrest you anyway, right? Like, so the guy, and this was also the argument that I made to Mechanic, that if the government wanted to arrest anyone for the content on their laptop, there were so many easier ways they would do that than dealing with the Bitcoin blockchain. So I think this argument of CSAM and the Bitcoin blockchain being used for illicit content, I don't think it's a very strong argument. I think the technical argument, whether this data should or shouldn't be in the op return, is a way more productive way to debate the subject than getting people all riled up over a very sensitive topic that should have been a non-issue and not raising attention to the topic. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but I have some concerns. For me, they're more personal than they are legal. That I just don't want that shit on anything that I own. I'm not super concerned about somebody breaking down my front door and coming after me for this particular thing, but I just don't want any part of it. I think that the legal argument, there are a lot of things like, well, should is something, whether it's contiguous or non-contiguous, doesn't matter. Does it need third-party software to assemble it, to create the CSAM, like all those sort of things? I think it's just kind of gamesmanship to a certain degree. People that just say, well, bytes are bits or bits, or bytes are bytes, or, you know, whatever, are kind of playing games. For me, it's more moral, personal. Like I know what's there, and I don't want that shit on my machine. I do want to say something too about, you know, Luke and Ocean and all that. Like I work with Luke. Obviously I'm closely affiliated with Ocean, but I do think it's important too, and with Mechanic too, both who've been very vocal. Not everything they say is how can I say? So they're not always speaking for Ocean. So I think Ocean and Knots are distinct from Luke and Mechanic, and I do think that's an important thing. So for instance, I'm on the board at Ocean too. If I didn't say that before, I'll clarify that now. And for instance, Giacomo Zucco's on the board at Ocean. The four of us, Luke and Mechanic and Giacomo and myself, we don't agree on everything. Like we don't all view everything exactly the same way. And I'll also say that one of the interesting things about Ocean is that, now this would be kind of a funky thing, but what Ocean is first and foremost promoting is, hey, if you're a miner, create your own template. We're not telling you how to create your template. The very point of Datum and of Knots is to give you the choice to configure it as you wish. So there's no...
So quick follow-up. So a miner on Ocean, right now, if you wanted to, personally, you can mine a greater than 80 byte op return while still mining on Ocean. You can you can grab one of these major blocks and mine on Ocean.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, there's no censorship or filtering of blocks presented by the miners, right? By Ocean. Which, if you think about it, it's kind of ironic in a way, because Ocean is the most open, most free place in which to mine. If you want to express yourself, you can do that.
Sorry. So anything else you wanted to add? Because I interrupted.
Go ahead.
No. Anything else you were saying? I kind of interrupted you.
Well, I just want to make the point that, and I know it's hard to separate the individuals from the company, but there is a distinction, and you know, I try my best to say when I'm speaking for myself or if I'm speaking for Ocean, and I'm definitely here today speaking for myself. I'm rarely speaking for Ocean, but I think that's an important thing too, that these things get conflated. But the reason I brought this point up, though, was that in practice, Ocean is the only accessible mechanism for a miner to put in templates whatever they would like. There are accelerators like Slipstream from Mara that somebody that wants to get a certain transaction through probably can go to. But as Jimmy was saying, like, hey, somebody can take a BitX and run their own node and create their own templates and mine pretty much whatever the heck they want within consensus on Ocean.
Okay. So we covered that topic. So how do you see things? I'm going to cut back on screen share. So how do you see things going forward, right? Because there are several people in our comments that are commenting on BIP 444, which I have not reviewed yet, so I can't really comment on that and what it entails, but there have been several comments on that. And we're hearing, in our last podcast with Luke towards the end, I don't know if you caught how they were smiling about, a movement to maybe create a UASF to prevent these op returns, which I personally think is would be a terrible idea. But we're going to discuss this on future shows. So I already have parts 4 and 5 planned. hopefully part 4 later this week, and then part 5 next week. And where do you see this going? Because people have now been, let's say, really riled up and really turned anti-core. I agree with you, by the way. I think that sometimes it feels like developers are making changes for the sake of making changes. And maybe this change was completely unnecessary. And I brought up this topic to Adam Back. But in their view, the core developers did, look at the environment, right? So when you said earlier that core developers didn't get the opinion from the community, but from the core's perspective, they did. And they did not expect this to be as controversial as it was, because in their view, this had more consensus on this particular policy change across the field. And I don't think they expected this anti-core movement to grow this big, even though there was already an anti-core movement growing over how Taproot has been used since they implemented that change. And so how do you see things going forward? And there are always two things here, right? This is when I do my geopolitical content in terms of, let's say, the Russia-Ukraine situation. There is how things are going and how I think they're going to end up versus what my opinion is, right? Like my opinion could be irrelevant, right? There are, I could want X, but I know that I'm not going to get X, and therefore the result will be Y. So we can talk. So try to split that up versus what you think is going to happen and what you want to happen.
So, yeah, there's a lot there. I'll start with, I think core followed their normal process. And I think I'll give them certainly the benefit of any doubt that I think that they had a reasonable consensus around this change. I think what was missed was that there are changes in the way the community exists today. And there are people outside of their normal, I'll call it echo chamber, although that's probably being a little too negative, their own echo chamber, which is a pretty small group of people. And I think they have to go to another layer. And people like myself that have tried to get more involved and be more participatory within their sphere. Like I said, I don't feel very welcome, or I don't feel very respected. And, I have a background in coding. I know what an unsigned integer is, for instance, but I think there's this perception that core believes that if you don't have a certain pedigree, you haven't done certain things like contributed to the code, that you don't understand the dynamics and that your opinion isn't relevant into the future of Bitcoin. And so I think that was the misstep. I hope at a minimum what this does is changes that I think, I mentioned this before. If there are bug fixes, if there are security patches, if there are performance enhancements, I think core can stay within their normal sphere and do those sort of things. But when they start touching policy, when they start touching features, I think they have to go much, much slower, and they have to broaden the community input. I mentioned, you guys know, I came from personal computer days. In the way back, like in the early and mid 80s, when we were designing PCs, it was just the engineers deciding whatever the hell we wanted to build. By the mid to late 90s, we would present ideas and things, but we had a whole group of people that we had to interact with that cared a lot about what we did. And if we were adding features or removing features or things like that, it was a lot harder to do. It was a pain in the ass, by the way. And sometimes it was frustrating because we couldn't communicate properly with the audience, but the people cared. And if we did something wrong or we misstepped, and I'll also say that the most important part of the whole process was just engaging people and listening to them and letting them feel like they were heard, even if you didn't end up going the direction they wanted. So I think that that's the lesson for core. I think that on this specific area, I can't tell you whether BIP 444, I've done some research on it, I think, but it's not comprehensive. I think there are some interesting elements to it. Certainly, I think the way that the inscriptions and things like that have come about is an exploit, and it's leveraging an unintended consequence of the way Taproot and SegWit worked, and so I think patching that and forcing activity, back into op return, because I think that's part of the whole thing too. Is right, nobody's going to do op return stuff really because it's a lot more expensive. They're going to do a whole bunch of shit typically on the other side, but that other side is the exploit. So I think in general, I'm not saying 444, but I would certainly be open and potentially supportive of something that patched that bug and maybe put the network back behavior. I think there's always going to be some need for some arbitrary data. I don't really object to the 83 bytes. Adam, for instance, part of the discussion with him on that, Adam has said like, hey, can't we just do like 256 bytes? And I think if we did that, it would probably, at this point, I don't know what that would do. It may be too late, but it certainly would have made, I think, this whole thing a non-issue.
Well, nothing is probably too late. Is there an upper limit that you would be okay with? Let's say is 250 your personal opinion max, or do you think it's okay to go a little bit higher? 100K definitely sounds excessive. That started this whole craziness, but right now it's 80 bytes versus 100,000. That's a big road to drive a truck through, right?
Right.
What's
I don't object to small, like I said, a handful of bytes. I don't know. 256 doesn't seem terrible to me, frankly. And I think if you're trying to put a hash or a series of hashes into an op return, I think that works well. I think if you want to put a small text message in there, that works well, and I think that's well within the spirit of things. I don't think that. I mean, maybe you're right. I think at this point that would probably be maybe something that would at least cause a bit of a truce for a while. The thing that really worries me is that I mentioned this a couple times already, but a lot of this comes around mining centralization, right? That we kind of trace the whole thing back. It's all about, well, we want to make sure miners stay decentralized. I'm a miner. I'm a smaller miner. The factors that worry me about mining centralization are things like behavior of the public miners, the aggregation in these pools, the way FPPS payouts work. Like those are the things. Now I know those aren't things that core can affect. And by the way, lack of template diversity, that's probably number one. Like lack of template diversity is a big piece. So I want to see those things fixed. But they're not things that core can fix, at least by themselves. And I think that it's very dangerous to assume that the current conditions are representative of future conditions. When I opened today, I kind of said that on a specific reason. I said 5 years ago, we had almost a completely different set of top 5 pools and a completely different set of top 5 hashers. And 5 years from today, I think it's almost certain the same thing will occur, that we'll have a completely different set of top pools and template creators and a top set of hashers. And what their behavior is, do they like filters? How do they create templates? I don't know, but I don't think we can say that the current network behavior is representative of the future network behavior. I can have my guess as to what I think the future network is going to behave like, but it's just a guess, and so is everybody else.
Gotcha. I have a few more follow-ups. Jimmy, you want to jump in on this?
So I think the threat that you identified, which is lack of template diversity, the thing that I'm still trying to fully digest is the fact that a lot of public miners are using pools as a way to get plausible deniability on what goes into the blocks. They don't actually want to create block templates, which for me reframes the entire miner decentralization thing that we all really want. And this is something that Core has said, something that Knots has said. This is something that the entire industry wants, but this seems like a fundamental legal liability hurdle that I'm not sure we can get have any sort of technical solutions to, because they kind of want to have different they don't want to create the template, so we can't make them want to, and they're happy being hashers rather than miners. So it's a very that's something I'm still trying to figure out, like, is there a solution to this? Because that's actually like a pretty big deal. And I everybody I've talked to, both on the Core side and the Knot side, their goal is miner decentralization. They want template diversity. They don't want OFAC sanctions list to like become standard or something like that. They don't want censorship and all that. How, like, do you have any ideas on how to get there, given this particular incentive, which is so obvious and understandable when you say it, but it's just something that I haven't considered. I doubt a lot of people within Core or Knots has really even considered. So how do you solve for that?
Well, I think that one is, if you're a public company, shareholder pressure means a lot. So if you're a shareholder of a public mining company, I'm using the word mining in the broader sense here, you can put pressure on them to behave a certain way. You can say, hey, you guys move a certain direction, and otherwise I'm selling my stock. And they will listen. They have to listen, especially if big groups come together. So I think that's one thing that can be done is pressure. Now, part of the problem is that those are probably small groups, but they still can be vocal, and they still can cause problems, because if you look at the shareholder table of a lot of the public miners, you're going to see a lot of names like BlackRock in the list, and there's probably not them that's going to be doing that. So one is, I think you got to put pressure on the public miners. Number two, I am hopeful that we're going to see that maybe we have already seen kind of a peak in the hash rate controlled by the public miners. We're seeing them pivot hard toward AI and some other things where their business model is changing. So it's part of the reason why I say I think 5 years from now we're going to see a different profile. So I hope we see a lot more independent miners, privately held miners, that have a different voice and view things differently. This doesn't hurt. Obviously, you've probably run the math, Jimmy. I mean, it's hard under present conditions for the bid axes of the world to materially change hash rate. But I do think over time we're going to see more consumer-oriented mining equipment come about. Everything from, obviously, there's this whole home heating movement. I think we'll see everything from rice cookers to pet bed warmers that have hashing power within them ultimately, and I think that will help. But all that said, I do share that concern. It's partly why I bring it up, is that it is a big problem. And we also, by the way, one other thing we didn't even talk about is there's a whole bunch of people with hash power and in other parts of the world that aren't connected at all to kind of the main network, right? I mean, there's massive amounts of hash power and capital in Bitcoin and in mining in China and Russia and Kazakhstan and, you know, these sort of places.
Yeah.
And Iran. And here's an interesting one. I'm working on something right now. It's about kind of nation state and mining. And it's my prediction, not necessarily in 5 years, but over a period of time, that we're going to see most nation states have some level of mining that they directly control. And if we get 30 or 40 different countries in the world, each with a little bit of mining, that will create a bunch of decentralization, kind of a backwards way of, or kind of a weird way of achieving some level of decentralization, where the nation states maybe create a massive number of different templates with a whole bunch of different criteria.
Yeah. The other thing that I kind of get from you, Bob, is that the knots versus core separation isn't, well, it might be currently based on this op return thing, but the sense that I get from you is that the far more consequential long-term separation or preferences that people ascribe to each one is based on how effective it is for mining, and the knobs that you can turn and so on to maximize your revenue, or whatever concerns that you might have as a miner. Tell us more about what features you're looking for that sort of affect your decision to go look at or go use knots versus core. And these are things I'm actually wanting to learn myself, because I have a BitAxe at home, and like as a miner and looking more long term towards which choice of software you use. Like what are the things that end up becoming important as you choose the block templates to mine?
Well, the first, especially I think for not necessarily for you, Jimmy, but for the average person, is that you'll find that Knots is user friendly, that it has essentially a GUI to it, and it has very, you have sliders, you can turn things on and off. It's very simple versus command line stuff that, if you're using Core to configure your node, it's only for like I said, it's kind of comparing DOS to Windows, I think, to a certain degree. Like, you can kind of do a lot of this shit with Core, but it's just not very user friendly. So I think that is one thing. And then two, like I mentioned, Coinage. So, there is a ability within Knots to flick those levers. I expect Knots will continue to add features and add configurability at the same time that maybe Core is they're kind of going the opposite direction. So I think fundamentally those are the key things. And if you, again, I'm speaking to the average person, not so you, Jim, but if you run for personal, I think we have, I don't know, 15 or so different nodes within our mining operations, different sites. We use different nodes and data implementations, but I also have one at home. And for home, I have a simple start 9 node that I've got Datum on, and it's and Knots and Datum on it, and it's really, really easy. And I think I could even take somebody who's almost technically illiterate and in 20 or 30 minutes walk them through that configuration. And that's just not the case with Core. And I don't detect, forgive me if I'm wrong, somebody in Core, I don't detect that is a major initiative within Core to make it more user friendly and accessible. I think that would be a great mission, by the way.
All right, let me jump back in. I do want to start to wrap it up. So this will be our last topic, maybe slightly controversial, but the way our last stream ended was, mentions of a potential user-activated soft fork, and that the UASF triggers me a little bit because Jimmy and I were front and center during the last user-activated soft fork that led into Bcash forking off the network, and then just for fun, we also covered the split between Bcash and BSV. Now, if we go back in time, I think Jimmy and I had like the only show dedicated to the user-activated soft fork, and people still come up to me today thanking me for navigating them through that time period. And Jimmy, you wrote 1 million articles, and then Jonathan wrote a book, which I honestly need to read because I don't like to read. I gotta get it on Audible.
Yeah.
And but I lived it, right? So I didn't really need to read about what I lived the whole thing. And
there are details in there that I didn't know. I'm sure you'd find it insightful.
Great book. Yeah, great book. My hat's off to it.
Were we mentioned in that book at all or no?
I don't think so. It was mostly like the meeting in Hong Kong and scaling Bitcoin and
I was there for
Montreal and
those.
stuff like that. Yeah.
I got kicked out of one of them.
Well, no, what like the private meetings and then like the New York agreement and what happened, stuff like that.
I got in trouble at 2 of them. Actually, we're not gonna go into that. Because I was anyway. I'm always on the edge of what things shouldn't do. I remember that well, and at the time for the user activated, and this, by the way, this is going to be our topic for the next 2 shows, because I just want to explain to people that you don't want to throw around the word user activated soft fork. It was a risk that we took back in the day, willing to let Bitcoin go to zero because it was so important, and it wasn't something we took lightly, and it was a risk, and it really paid off, and it may have set a slightly dangerous precedent that now I'm seeing this thrown around like 2017 was easy to pull off, and a lot of people throwing this around weren't there. They weren't in the trenches of how difficult that situation was. And Bob, I think you were around for that, but you weren't a public person.
Yeah.
So maybe you can comment on people shouldn't like throw this around randomly because I don't think they realize what the risks are.
Yeah. I don't want one. I'll say that. Like, I really don't want one. And I think if we go down that path, we have to be like, I don't think we're there. I know that'll probably some people that are typically on the Knots side. I do not want to go there. I view it as like a schism, in the Catholic Church, 2 popes, like it's very equivalent to that. I don't think that, I don't think anybody wins in this. And I think, it would be really unfortunate because I think Bitcoin's at a point where we may see this in our personal lives. I have a lot of non-Bitcoiner friends and acquaintances that are warming tremendously to Bitcoin right now. And the last thing I need to do is try to explain a schism in the community and why they shouldn't worry about it. And especially, me as a boomer, the people that I associate with, and I know this is a frustrating thing about some of the boomers, right? But people with a lot of money that when they come into Bitcoin, they're not talking about buying 1 million sats or something like that as a starter position. They're talking about throwing $1 million as a kind of a test position, and they would have no appetite. They will run for the hills, and they might not come back for 10 years if they detect that there's some major a division within Bitcoin, that a fork could occur. You know, they have to even understand what a fork is. They won't bother. They'll just go buy gold, right? And so I think it's a really bad timing for something like this. We have to figure out a different way to resolve this.
Yeah, I agree. Let me just add, I don't know if Jimmy wants to jump in or not. I want to address just a couple of comments in the chat. Bob, did you watch the panel from Lugano with Lop, Todd, Mechanic, and Luke?
Only snippets.
Okay.
I didn't watch the whole thing.
I haven't seen it at all, even though I was there.
I did see the whole thing. I thought it was interesting, and there are comments in our live chat calling Lop and Peter Todd bad actors, and Luke Dashjr like used those terms. They're not bad actors, guys. Like honestly, I'm friends with Jameson Lop. I disagree with almost every project he's involved in, but I don't think he's a bad actor. I just disagree with all the projects he's involved in. I always thought Peter Todd. I never thought Peter Todd was a bad actor. I disagree with a few things that Peter Todd does. And I don't think Core are bad actors. There is now this stigma against Core that they're somehow been, what was the word I always forget? Like, not coerced, infiltrated or
corrupted.
Corrupted. I don't believe that's the case. And Core is a pretty decentralized entity, as Jonathan Bear always points out. And I think we're all going down a really bad path. And this is why we're going to do a few more shows to try and do our best to bring the community together a little bit, because at the end of the day, we're arguing over spam, right? Of all the things we can argue about, there are bigger battles to be fought. And I personally think it's not too late to get this on the right track for the community to kind of come together. But what are your just final thoughts on that? And sorry, there was one more comment I wanted to address, and that is a lot of people think that user activated soft fork to kick Core out is the only solution, and people are commenting on that. In my opinion, I think that's a bad solution. I hope it doesn't come to that, but that's what these shows are going to try and rationally explain to people why some things are not the best ideas, and maybe wait until it's absolutely necessary before even thinking about that direction.
Well, the way I view it is, while spam may be the headline, the real battle is differences of opinion on the best way to decentralize mining, because I think the entire spam position of Core comes back to that. And I think the thing that frustrates me is that we have a group of people, myself included, that feel this doesn't help decentralization. The changes in v30 don't help fight decentralization at all, and frankly, we should have done nothing. Like, nothing was really the right answer. And so I don't know Jameson personally. I can't make comments on him. I know Peter a tiny bit. We've had a few conversations. I can say I think both of them are highly intelligent people. I think there are, one thing about Bitcoin I'll say is, there are a lot of really, really smart people in this community. That I came from another industry, the personal computer industry, that had a lot of really smart people. Bitcoin is very similar, like brilliant people. But I think people that think they have it figured out, but the dangerous thing is, even with all these smart people, whether I'm smart or not, I don't know, but I have my opinions. I think some people have way too much certainty about the future and are making decisions about how they think things play out that are really just guesses, and they're not even high probability guesses. They're just swags. And so we shouldn't be making changes right now. If I'm not saying ossify, I'm not an ossifier exactly, but like change has to be really, really slow, whether that's policy, certainly, I mean, consensus. I mean, I don't even think we should talk about consensus. We should only talk about policy and not talk about consensus at all. But I think if we could get back to like, hey, if we agree that as I think one of the two of you said, like, hey, we all agree that we need to fight mining decentralization. And let's
mining centralization.
Well, yeah, right. Sorry. So I did the second time today. What did I did Strawman Steelman thing too. But you know, I think we can all agree that we have to fight that. And I think if we focus on being constructive and bringing people together to focus on that, we'd be much better off. I hate spam. I'm pretty much a monetary maximalist. As I said, I'm okay with a little bit of arbitrary data in an op return, or you know, certainly we do things in the SIG script of the Coinbase. Like I put Barefoot mining in there, like when we want to block, right? By the way, not all the time. Interestingly, we don't do it 100% of the time. But
interesting. Okay.
Yeah. part of just a side note, you might like if I do it every time, Jimmy. Like I'm a private company, and like I'll answer just about any question, but I don't like telling people how much power I have and how much hash power I have exactly. And so if I announce
how many Bitcoin do you have? Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. So if I announce every single block I win, I'm essentially anybody with some mathematical skills can figure out how much hash rate I have, right?
Fair.
So
yeah, although that brings up like a whole like sort of, you know, there are enough like transaction signatures. I can't imagine like the level of granularity that you can, or analysis that you can put towards like block headers and the order in which you put transactions and stuff like that, which will probably give away who mined what based on template construction. Yeah,
could be. Yeah,
yeah. But I think for me, the big takeaway is that the long-term fates of core and knots is probably based on what you were saying. It's how user-friendly they are, and ultimately, I think this is what this whole op return argument is about. Is it you know, who's it serving? And we know that Core has, for a long time, had most of the network running it. But as we decentralize in mining, and we have more features that people are looking to use for their own mining templates and so on, this seems like the bigger long-term consideration for who chooses what node to run, and not necessarily the, you know, thing that we're all screaming about right now, which is you know, data carrier size and so on. And that's useful. Yeah. I think you bring like a very long-term perspective that I guess befitting a veteran of many industries and so on. But that's something that I think we've lost sight of a little bit with regard to you know, where the network is going to end up, because it's not necessarily little instances like this that determine everything. It's really about continuous improvement and fulfilling the desires of the users and so on.
Yeah, well said.
All right, that sounds like a good way to wrap this up. Let me just mention what the plan is. I don't think Jimmy fully knows the plan for the next episode. So
I don't either. I don't know.
For the next episode, even though Jimmy's my co-host here, because he definitely knows the technicals. So in our first episode with that I'm back, we got a really good, you know, technical argument for why Core did what they did. But I think Adam Back's comments were completely over the head of like 98% of our viewers, and including me for a time, for a half of everything Adam said. And so the plan for episode 4 is going to be to bring on someone to explain the core's position and why version 30 is not as, Bitcoin of a killer as people are currently believing. We want to just present their view as to why they didn't think this would be as controversial as it was. So we're not going to bring on a technical person. We're going to bring on 1 or 2 people that can explain it in layman's terms. And maybe that could help cool the debate a little bit. And then we can start discussing what can actually be done going forward, because people are really starting to hate on each other, especially on Twitter. And it's getting a little out of control where you can't even have a proper civil discussion. So that's basically the plan for the next one, to present a layman's view of Core 30, because Core 30 does have, again, this is a controversial statement I'm about to make. Core 30 has a much better technical argument for what they did, but the not side has a way better, emotional / legal argument, and legal is maybe, nobody really knows. They have a way better argument in that front, and more of a, well, I don't like spam on Bitcoin, therefore spam on Bitcoin shouldn't exist. And I see it all over the comments, but unfortunately, that is your opinion, because the technical side of Bitcoin allows for 1 block, and one side, when people say we're against censoring, we only want, we're against censoring, Bitcoin needs to be only money, but you're censoring, right? You're preventing other data into the block. So it is a bit of a nuanced debate where one side thinks they're not censoring, but they are kind of censoring, right, in order to keep Bitcoin as money. So, and our opinions on it are, again, it's just an opinion, and being very vocal about it on Twitter is very, very challenging. Anyway, I kind of rambled on a little bit there, but that's the plan for the next episode. So,
do we have a name for this hypothetical core person that's not too technical but can explain things in layman's terms?
You and I will discuss it offline.
Okay.
A few options are there, because I think the core side needs to be properly presented to people, because I think the core side got caught off guard with the emotional movement that started with knots. I think it was driven a little more policy than technical, and people could disagree with what I just said, but that's what it looked like to me, which is why I kind of came back and wanted to cover the topic.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, guys, thank you all so much for watching. Real quick, I keep forgetting to. I will be in El Salvador. Jimmy will be in El Salvador. Bob, are you going to be in El Salvador?
I will not be in El Salvador, but sounds
Bob
like a good
will
one.
not be in El Salvador. Hey, guys, if you go over to tonevase.com, I have my public calendar of the events I'm going to be in. I keep forgetting to even promote some of these events. Tonevase.com calendar. If you go over, I'm in Panama right now, so you guys can see where I am. I will be speaking at Bitcoin Historical, then adopting Bitcoin. There's also a health event happening in El Salvador right before these events. After that, I'm going to head over to Roatan. This will be like a 1 week. There'll be no speakers. It's only like $200 to just chill with us on the most beautiful island in the world, where a private city is being built. And after that, you can find me in Mexico at the Mayan Bitcoin conference, and we may do a little health and wellness retreat on the island of Isla Mujeres. So go ahead and check this out. Hopefully, I'll see a lot of you at some of these events. If you click on this, there is a link for you to check these out. Anything you guys want to promote before we head out?
No, thank you. Thanks for having me, Tom.
Looking forward to seeing you in person, Tom. It's been a while.
It's been a little while. I kind of retired from Bitcoin events, but I'm in Latin America. El Salvador is right around the corner. So I figured, hey, let me come and hang out with some Bitcoiners.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, guys. Let me stop the screen share. And Bob, thank you again. Your thoughts were much appreciated. Guys, please comment to these streams on Twitter, on X, or on YouTube. And we will see you all hopefully later this week. Bye, guys.
Bye.